Hi there. My name is Michael Mirdad, and I appreciate you taking a moment to watch this video. This is sort of a departure from what I often do or usually do. A lot of people know of me. I've been doing work as a sort of a spiritual teacher, an author, and doing healing work with people for about 40 years. And again, this is sort of a departure because I talk about life and spirituality, meditation, self-worth, and working on ourselves and improving our lives, that sort of thing. Just quite a variety of topics. And ever since I started teaching around 1980, I was teaching about the connectedness of everything, healing to spirituality, obviously, but also variety of spiritual topics, UFOs, Bible, ancient civilizations, things that are now becoming kind of more popular or acceptable on History Channel. You see things like that. But these are all topics that I've been teaching since about 1980. And it wasn't as acceptable then, but I just did it because I could see the connectedness to things. Well, it just happens, this again being a bit of a departure, that I met a unique person in around 1984. It might have been give or take a year, but I think it was around 1984. This is an individual who became a bit of a controversial figure, but I'm going to talk about him. And, it's interesting because I've heard and seen some things on the internet about him. His name is Frank Stranges. And Frank was quite a wonderful guy, but I met him way back. And, I think he was born in the 1920s, passed away maybe 10 years ago, roughly. And I know that, he had a wife and a pretty wonderful wife, and I believe he had family members that were, decent people and so on. He had quite a background. I think he was like the national, for the deputies, the National Deputy Association or something like. I think he was the chaplain of that group. So he had people that respected him on mainstream levels, academic levels or mainstream levels, a bit of a theologian of sorts. I mean, he was really, pretty rich background, but also kind of a simple guy in many respects, in my estimation. But he claims to have met a person named Valiant Thor, and it's actually a name that was made up because it fit the times in the 50s when he met Val. And so the name was given by the being to be something that people could relate to, but it's really worthless in the big picture. But this has become a bit of a controversy. But, so you see people saying, is it true? Did he meet somebody? Was this guy real? Long story short, he says, look, I was just doing my work, and I think he worked at the Pentagon or something. But he meets this guy who introduces himself as being an ET, a higher dimensional being, but a being from Venus. And without going into all the details, but this being introduced himself to Frank and explained, I'm here to help your world. There are many of us here helping your world from higher realms. And yes, there are laws about how much influence beings can have because of free will, but it still isn't breaking the laws when they say we're here to propose, and then you guys can choose to take that or not. So those of you who know my teachings, you know I teach on most every topic. Some of you, it might be strange to see me doing a video just on this because this is sort of ET related, but in case you don't know some parts of my teaching, I'll make it clear that angels do exist, ETs do exist, light beings do exist, and darker beings do exist. There are more things in heaven and earth that are dreamt of in all your philosophies. So these things do exist. So it might push the limits for some of you watching, in your beliefs, but just, do your best to accept it. If it doesn't resonate with you, for sure, let it go. But Frank was, I think, a really great guy. He wrote a book called Stranger at the Pentagon, and he also did some other work, less notable or less popular to people. But Stranger at the Pentagon was quite a stir because, here you have this guy saying, I come from the mainstream world, and I met this guy. He says he's from Venus. He includes some photos, a family gathering with this guy, Val. And but only a couple photos are known to have included him. And, he's saying, that this actually happened and that this guy advised him and gave him feedback, and that, there was a moment where he told me and he told others, I think it was, Nixon walks in the room when he was just a vice president and engaging with Val. Several heads of state of different types, Pentagon officials, and also Kennedy, Robert, I think it was, that it's been so many years now, but that I've talked about this, but Robert, I think, got in on this a couple of times, meeting with Val. So there's a lot to it. Now, I want to say that Frank's sharing of this seemed very real and authentic. And yet, Frank had, in my opinion, a bit of a dry sense of humor. So once in a while, he'd say something, just quips about this, and people would think that he was still talking for real about the experience, but he might have been a dry sense of humor, kind of a joke, and people would think that that's part of the story, and then it looks a little like a flaky story. So I noticed that a couple of times in our time and interactions. And I met Frank when we did a conference. He was invited as a speaker. I think there were 6 of us. And, we did this conference. It was in British Columbia. And, he spoke, and, people dug it. I don't know why he was chosen as one of the speakers, but he was, and I was chosen to be one of the speakers about ancient civilizations and so on. This is in the 90s, mid-90s. And early 90s or so. And, so I did my talk, and there are some photos that we're going to post here where you'll see me. There's maybe 2 of them I'll show. They're pretty similar, but it's me on stage speaking, and you can see Frank sitting in the background looking like he was one of the guys at the grassy knoll, of the Kennedy assassination, because he's got his dark shades and all that. He was a little like that. He was a little cautious with people in some ways, but really kind of jovial and upbeat and open to talking. But what's interesting is I've noticed things coming online about this now that the internet's happened. In those days, that wasn't really out there. But people are asking, is this authentic? And they're disputing, and you have skeptics and conspiratorial people all the time fighting about these things. I'm only going to tell you what I know, and some of it's personal perception. He seemed authentic and so on. But in my experience, I know there are controversies around some of these things, and I'm telling you that, Frank is real. Frank spoke. Frank said he had these experiences. He shared a lot of these things with me. We interacted a bit through the 90s. And one thing that's interesting is that when you're looking at the pictures, you'll see a strange energy field around me. Now, those of you who know me as a teacher know that those kinds of things can happen when I'm talking, and you get a certain special effects and phenomena that kind of takes place, and some of you might be skeptical and not believe that. But I'm just putting this out there anyway. You'll see that in the picture, and you also see Frank sitting behind me. Whether that is my own energy field that shows up on camera, or whether you think that might be related to the energy around Frank, you can take your best guess at those things. However, one thing that's really cool, I remember this when I was doing the talk, because Frank, people knew, wow, he's got this Venusian guy that he interacts with. Not everybody knew about that, but some of the people that spoke, because not everybody in the audience knew all the speakers. So a lot of them weren't familiar with him, but I do remember that when I got done speaking, I went off the exit stage left, kind of concept. I exited the stage, and Frank, we walked out the door and down, there's a few steps, I think it was. And and it was an outdoor thing, but they had a stage built, a big kind of just a nice, really cool alcove-ish looking stage, amphitheater-like. So we went out the back, went down the stairs, and I remember Frank saying, I would like you to introduce you to somebody. And I didn't know all about Frank's. He hadn't done his talk yet, and I hadn't met him before. So I didn't know about all this, but I do know that when I went out the back and down the steps, he said, I'd like to introduce you to somebody. And he introduces me to somebody that ends up looking like or being Valiant Thor. or Val. And that engagement connection meeting was really interesting. I mean, he just basically said, whatever, pleasure to meet you, all the niceties. He said, I'm aware of your work and it's wonderful. It's in line with what we're doing. This is all about bringing the presence of God to this planet, to this world, and the presence of love. I mean, there were, wonderful exchanges. But in the moment, I thought I was meeting a person. So, it's just like, well, thank you. You're being nice, you're connecting. Well, great to meet you too. It's met on that level. And yet it was interesting because I turned back in the door because we were just outside the door and down a couple steps. I turned back in the door, grabbed something, a coat or whatever it happened to have been, and came back and he wasn't there. And there was nowhere he could have gone. But that kind of struck me as, wow. But I've experienced many strange things. So it was a little like, wow. And then, okay, maybe I missed something, but it's obvious that something supernatural may have happened. But again, it's fairly common. I'm used to the supernatural, I guess you could say. So it was kind of interesting. And I really put it together when I started hearing whispers of people at the conference, especially regarding Frank. Hey, did you see that black-haired guy around Frank? And that there was this buzz going. Did you hear? Because other people saw him too. Now I'm going, okay, so I didn't dream that, obviously. And other people were saying, yeah, but it was like he was there and then he wasn't there. So whether you believe in this story about Frank or not, I can tell you firsthand, someone was there and then wasn't there. And then the other people around were starting to notice the same thing, and I hadn't told them my experience with Val. So we had brief conversation, did meet the person, a unique and incredible, beautiful vibe to him. And it was later, I think Frank probably gave me a copy of his book during that weekend, and I saw the guy's picture. The thing to me, though, is that he looked somewhat the same. So my first impression then was ageless. That's what it felt like to me. I think somebody posted something online and said, this is Val today, because he's still around, and it was a gray-haired person in the picture. That didn't make sense to me, but whatever. I don't know if that picture's real or authentic or whatever. I only know my experience. And I know that Laura, there's a gal named Laura Eisenhower, as in the Eisenhower, family president. I know that she has caught wind of this and sort of started validating the stories to people that this did exist, that there was somebody like this around the Pentagon, and it was kind of cool to hear that she might be validating Val's story regarding him and Frank. One other kind of funny thing is that I was doing another talk, because I think each of us did 2 or 3 talks, but I did another talk, and true story, man, this is just weird, but there was this moment in another one of my talks where, and I remember hearing it before during this talk, during the weekend, but now it was starting to gel. And so I was able to make a little bit of a joke about it, but there were helicopters. Now, some of you won't know what this means, but some of you are going to catch on right away. Unmarked black helicopters, choppers, that would come in, get kind of, hover about a little bit and then move on. And this happened a few times during that weekend. And that in itself was strange. To people that kind of were aware of the black helicopter governmental connection to UFOs and, people that are seemingly a threat or talking about UFOs and ETs, this is not uncommon, but there were UFOs. It's on the video if anybody out there has the video of the conference and our talks. But during my talk, I remember in come the videos, you hear them, barely, but you hear them, above. And they come in and they just kind of hover. And you can see there's a vibe in the audience like, this is weird. This is it's outside of Nelson, BC. It's out in the boonies. Beautiful territory, beautiful land, but it's out in the boonies. There's nothing here. Why would these choppers be here? Why would they be hovering about at this peace, love conference, New Age, New Thought / channeling / whatever conference? Why would they be there? But I just blurted out, I go, oh, don't worry about the helicopters, they're here for Frank. You know, and I got a bit of a laugh out of him, but everybody kind of, then it broke the nervous tension because that was actually there. So the story is just to help illustrate that these things did happen. Frank passed on, I think, about 10 years ago, as I said, but the controversies that are out there, people trying to validate and invalidate the story. I can only tell you, I met Val and we had a discussion. He looked to me ageless. Other people at the conference also saw him and were very, wow, who was that guy that was around Frank? And then he wasn't, yet we saw him and then it was like he was gone. So that's several people were able to see / witness that somebody was there. Maybe a three-dimensional person that's not from Venus, but it was Val and it looked like Val. And the fact that he could just be there and then he was not there, coincidental or strange or whatever, it starts to not look so when you add up all the rest. When you have the helicopters come in the story, then something, almost extra strange starts to look like it's happening. But again, those of you who don't know about any of this, that's fine. Maybe this will just be an introduction to the fact that there are beings from higher dimensions that interact with us. They have since the beginning of time. This isn't the time or place to try and go into all that. And some of that's starting to be seen and acknowledged in some shows like those you see on History Channel. But a lot of that gets overly hyped. And a lot of it's inaccurate in those shows, but some of it is accurate. And it's beautiful that things are starting to mesh together and people are starting to understand and accept that there are other things out here and in the world and around us. But there are angels, there are. You don't have to choose between aliens and angels to see which one's real. They all exist. Angels are of the highest realms, and light beings, lesser but higher than ours. ETs, I always distinguish between light beings are ETs of an angelic kind of an intention or energy. Some of these shows, there are even people that are confused, scratching their heads saying, we don't know because the stories about alien interactions are contradictory. Some people say they're malevolent, some say they're benevolent, so we're confused. I don't even know why they're confused, because there's both. Light beings are very, benevolent, and typically they're related to star systems. Guys, I know it may sound out there for some, but Sirius, Arcturus, and some other systems, but at the same time, there are some mischievous, malevolent beings related to other star systems. I won't go in and name anymore, but star systems that are just, with a darker intention, a little more mischievous, manipulative. So those things do exist, such as genetic manipulations and all, those things you might have caught wind of by now. Those things do exist. Abductions, they do exist, but some are not abductions. They're more like connections, close encounters with beings that are of a very benevolent nature. Those beings serve angels, and the angels serve God. So it's all part of a mission of light, sort of in conflict with a mission of darkness by some other beings, just like on Earth. We have nice people, not so nice people. It's the same thing in the cosmos. Again, this isn't the place to try to cover all that, but the story I think is pretty cool, and I'm just in a sense going to bat for Frank, saying he was a good guy, and there's an authenticity to who he was and his story. I can only validate that much. I wasn't there when he takes him into the Pentagon to meet officials. It fits everything else that I experienced, but I can't tell you that took place. The story's pretty clear. The story's pretty real. And I meet the guy years later myself. And that doesn't mean I need people to start trying to validate or invalidate my story. I'm just telling you what happened. And we do have those photos, and we do have some video out there, and you can hear the choppers, and you can hear people's response to this strange, thing that's happening in the atmosphere, meaning these choppers come in. And again, out in the boonies, they shouldn't have needed to be there. But making light of it. So I pray this is, filled in some pieces. Maybe this is only going to be seen by people that are interested in the Valiant Thor story and the Frank Strange's story. again, unfortunately, he's passed on. And I know that he had a wife that was wonderful, and he spoke highly of her, in my opinion. And I also know that there have been the skeptics that have, in some cases harassed her, which I don't think is really, really necessary to try to prove yourselves right and prove the unusual things of the universe to be wrong. If you don't agree with them, then just don't agree. I don't think you need to try to cause harm to other people just to fight for your case. That's my take anyway. But I pray, like I said, I pray this has filled in some gaps and maybe opened some doors, new doors for some people. And those of you who believe in the ancient alien concept and alien encounters and space beings and so forth, and ever felt dissed or whatever, my heart goes out to you, because I know it's not an easy thing to own such stories that seem wild to some, and really, they can be really heavy-handed and hard on us for believing those kinds of things. So I'm sorry that happens in this world, but it is what it is, and we all stand together and just do our part to let people know our experiences and let it be where it'll be, okay? So thanks so much for listening, and I hope this helps. Peace to you. Bye-bye.